In the remote hills of eastern Oregon, a truth so horrifying lies buried beneath decades of official silence, suppressed by local authorities for over a century. From 1852 to 1888, along a 20-mile stretch of the Oregon Trail, more than 800 pioneers vanished. Their end did not come from disease or accidents, but to something far more sinister. A modest wooden structure that promised salvation to dying travelers, the Sacred Heart Chapel, was in fact the epicenter of the most methodical mass murder scheme in American frontier history. What began as isolated disappearances became a ruthlessly efficient, calculated family enterprise that redefined evil itself. The Grayson family didn't merely kill for money, they perfected it into an art form. They kept meticulous records of every dream they buried in shallow graves, every family they destroyed, every life they took. Before we descend into the darkness that consumed the Grayson family and their victims, I must ask something of you. This channel is not for everyone, but only for those brave enough to confront the most disturbing truths hidden in America's past. If you are one of the few who can handle these dark revelations, subscribe now and leave a comment telling me what state you're listening from. Your support is what helps us uncover the stories others dare not tell. Now, let's journey back to 1852, when the Oregon Trail promised hope but delivered horror. Across the American frontier, the Oregon Trail stretched like a lifeline, carrying dreams westward through 2,000 miles of unforgiving wilderness. For the thousands of families who sold everything for a new life, each mile represented both hope and peril. While disease, starvation, and natural disasters claimed countless lives, in the rolling hills of eastern Oregon, death wore a different face, one that smiled with Christian compassion while calculating the value of a family's possessions. The year 1852 marked the peak of Oregon Trail migration, with over 50,000 people making the treacherous journey west. By the time most wagon trains reached Oregon's Blue Mountains, they had already traveled nearly 1,800 miles. Families were exhausted, supplies were running low, and the weakest members were often succumbing to trail fever, dysentery, and other ailments that turned dreams of prosperity into a desperate struggle for survival. It was in this landscape of vulnerability that Father Murray Grayson established the Sacred Heart Chapel in 1851. Perched on a hill overlooking a natural stopping point, the weathered wooden structure was a place where weary travelers often paused to rest their oxen and bury their dead. To passing pioneers, the chapel represented divine providence, a beacon of hope in the wilderness where they could seek spiritual comfort and, if needed, proper Christian burial for their loved ones. Claiming to be a traveling missionary, Father Murray was a tall, gaunt man in his 40s with penetrating grey eyes and a voice that commanded respect. His eloquent speech about his calling to serve westward-bound families and his genuine-seeming knowledge of Scripture convinced even the most skeptical travelers. Beside him stood his devoted wife, who took the name Sister Constance, a woman whose gentle manner and apparent medical knowledge made her invaluable to families with sick children. Completing the trio was Murray's younger sibling, Brother Ezekiel. Where Murray possessed a commanding presence, Ezekiel was the practical one, skilled with his hands and always ready to help repair wagons or tend to animals. Together, they created an image of Christian charity that drew desperate families like moths to a flame. The chapel itself was modest but well-maintained, with rough-hewn pews facing a simple altar. Its most distinctive feature was an unusually large basement, which the Graysons explained was necessary for storing supplies to help destitute travelers. This isolation served them well, meaning fewer witnesses and less chance of outside interference. Local settlers generally spoke well of them, praising their generosity. Who else would dedicate their lives to ministering to dying strangers in the middle of nowhere? The Graysons were particularly effective because they understood the trail's brutal realities. They knew families reaching them would be dealing with serious illness, dwindling supplies, and psychological exhaustion. They positioned themselves as the answer, not just spiritual guides, but practical helpers who could provide medical care, supplies, and temporary shelter. Their denominational flexibility was crucial. Murray was well-versed in various Protestant traditions and could quote Scripture in whatever style best comforted his audience. The first recorded disappearance occurred on September 23, 1852. The Morrison family, James, his pregnant wife Elizabeth, their 3 young children, and Elizabeth's elderly father, were traveling alone when their wagon broke down just 2 miles from the chapel. Brother Ezekiel appeared with an uncanny sense of timing, inviting them to Sanctuary. Gratefully, they accepted, moving into the adjacent cabin. For 3 days, everything seemed normal. Then, Elizabeth's father fell ill. Sister Constance attributed it to trail sickness and administered her blessed remedies. Within hours, his condition worsened dramatically. When James grew alarmed and suggested seeking help, Father Marai counseled patience, saying moving him would surely kill him. The sickness, he claimed, had to run its course. By the 6th day, 2 of the children showed similar symptoms. Sister Constance worked tirelessly, administering her purifying treatments. To the exhausted parents, she seemed like a saint. The truth was far more sinister. Her remedies contained carefully measured doses of arsenic, the symptoms of which perfectly mimicked trail diseases. The arsenic, obtained from local mining operations under the pretense of pest control, caused stomach cramps, nausea, and eventual organ failure. Samuel Morrison died on the 7th day, followed by the children. Each death was accompanied by elaborate Christian rituals from Father Marai. The grieving, grateful survivors never questioned the rapid succession of deaths. Each night, Brother Ezekiel would systematically inventory the family's possessions, finding the gold coins James had sewn into his clothing. On the 12th day, James himself fell ill. Elizabeth, now in early labor, begged Sister Constance to save him. Her response was chilling: some illnesses are God's way of calling his children home. We must not question his wisdom. James died just hours before Elizabeth gave birth to a son who lived only long enough to be baptized. Elizabeth herself succumbed 3 days later. The entire family was wiped out in less than 3 weeks. To any outside observer, the Graysons had a perfect explanation: a virulent dysentery that struck entire families. The possessions were consecrated to the Lord's work. But this was only the beginning. The Graysons had discovered that murder, executed with planning and religious justification, could be extraordinarily profitable. Their success taught them valuable lessons. Isolated families were easier targets, arsenic poisoning perfectly mimicked common ailments, and their religious authority gave them unlimited credibility. Most importantly, the Oregon Trail provided an endless supply of victims who wouldn't be missed for months. They refined their operation with methodical precision. Ezekiel became their scout, identifying promising targets. Constance developed her poisoning techniques, disguising arsenic in teas and communion wine. Marai perfected psychological manipulation, adapting his theology to each victim's denomination. The chapel itself was modified. The basement was expanded into sections for storing possessions, preparing arsenic, and holding bodies. They dug a series of unmarked graves in a grove behind the chapel. The winter of 1852 to 1853 gave them time to plan. They sorted through their spoils and established relationships with black market dealers who asked no questions. Ezekiel proved adept at this, his honest face making his stories of selling goods for families who returned east believable. By spring 1853, they had transformed from amateur killers into professional predators. They had resolved the problems of victim selection, murder, disposal, and profit, and had created a public persona that made them above suspicion. Their second major success came in May with the Hoffman family, German immigrants with a language barrier and obvious wealth. This time, Constance began administering small doses of arsenic almost immediately, disguised as preventive medicine. The murder took nearly a month, allowing them to thoroughly inventory the valuable clockmaking tools. By the end of 1853, they had murdered 3 families totaling 16 people. They began keeping cold, business-like records in ledgers. A typical entry read, Morrison family, 5 souls departed. Estimated profit $400. Lessons learned, reduced dose frequency to extend timeline and reduce suspicion. As word of their charity spread, victims began seeking them out. The year 1855 marked a turning point when they encountered their first major challenge: a survivor. The Patterson family from Ohio was wealthy and intelligent. Thomas Patterson, a former merchant, was naturally suspicious. When Ezekiel approached them, Thomas initially refused help. But Ezekiel mentioned mountain fever in the area, playing on Emily Patterson's fears for her children. Reluctantly, Thomas agreed to visit the chapel. There, the Graysons deployed their usual charm. But Emily's sister, Catherine, was observant and analytical. She noticed Ezekiel inventorying their wagon and saw Constance add a white powder to medicine. Catherine, whose father had been a pharmacist, recognized it wasn't blessed salt. She pretended to take her medicine, spitting it into a handkerchief, and convinced the youngest child, Timothy, to do the same. While the rest of the family sickened, Catherine and Timothy remained healthy. Catherine realized the horrible truth and told her dying sister. They had to escape. One early morning, Catherine helped the weakened Emily and Timothy slip out to the wagon. As they prepared to leave, Father Marai found them. His cold reaction confirmed her fears. As he moved to force her back, the weakened Emily emerged with a pistol. In the distraction, Catherine struck Marai with a tool, stunning him long enough for them to flee. Their escape was a nightmare. After 3 days, they encountered a military patrol. Catherine's story was initially met with disbelief, but she had evidence, a vial of medicine and samples of the powder. When soldiers raided the chapel, they found the rest of the Patterson family dead and the Graysons gone, having vanished with most of their stolen possessions. The basement contained evidence of a systematic operation, possessions from dozens of families and detailed records. The ledgers revealed the Graysons had murdered over 150 people in less than 3 years. Catherine's survival marked the beginning of the end, but the Graysons had contingency plans. They reinvented themselves as the Morrison family at the Mission of Divine Mercy near the Oregon-California border, refining their methods with accomplices and faster-acting poisons. Federal Marshal William Harris, leading the investigation, recognized the pattern. Surveillance confirmed their guilt and their evolution into even more efficient killers. When agents saw Ezekiel poison a child, Marshal Harris ordered a raid. They found evidence connecting them to murders across multiple territories over more than a decade. Marai's journals revealed his psychological evolution from guilt-ridden justification to cold, business-like analysis of murder efficiency. Their plans included expanding to multiple locations and killing larger groups. The captured Henderson family provided first-hand testimony of the manipulation. At their trial in 1857, the prosecution's case hinged on Marai's meticulous records, which served as an undeniable confession. Catherine Patterson's testimony provided crucial context, and the physical evidence was overwhelming. Father Marai was convicted of multiple murders and hanged. Sister Constance received life imprisonment, and Brother Ezekiel was sentenced to 20 years. Their crimes exposed weaknesses in frontier law enforcement and changed how travelers viewed offers of help. The case revealed a methodical, sustained evil hidden behind a mask of righteousness, challenging fundamental assumptions about human nature and religious authority. The legacy of the Grayson family serves as a dark reminder of the predators who exploited the vulnerability of the American frontier. The courage of survivors like Catherine Patterson, who risked everything to expose the truth, provides a counterpoint to the darkness, ensuring that these forgotten horrors are brought to light.